But even the strenuous physical activity did little to redirect his mind from the track on which it was fixated. Her. The woman he'd been dreaming about since he was 16. Never like this, however. Never with blood, with fear that was chill sweat on his skin. It had been fun in the beginning, when he was a teen. He'd bragged to his fellow juveniles that he knew exactly what his mate looked like, that he was a step ahead of them when it came to the mating dance. His great-grandfather had been a foreseer, hadn't he? After the odd experiences both he and his twin had had over the years, when they'd just known things, even when those things hadn't yet come to pass, Yakov had been certain his dreams were a glimmer of foresight. It had made sense to him that the dreams were so powerful because they related to the woman who was to be the one for him. His mate. His heart. But he wasn't a teen any longer, and he was beginning to question his sanity. The dreams had stopped for years, only to return with a bloody and brutal vengeance this past week. Every freaking night. Always the same dream, too, of Yakov in his bear form, walking through the mist of early morning until he realized that he wasn't alone, was walking beside a woman with hair of softest gold and eyes of haunted blue. She knelt beside him at some point, her hand fisted in his fur as she cried into his neck. Her tears were so hot they burned, and all he wanted to do was change form, take her into his arms. But he couldn't disturb her in her pain, so he just folded his legs to come down to the ground, and he let her cry until all her tears were done and she could look him in the eyes again. "I'm sorry," she always said, her voice husky. "It's too late, don't you see?" Then, without warning, came the blood, the terror, the dying. Yakov's muscles quivered as he held a plank, but he couldn't hold back the memory of his rage in the dream, the echo of his bear's growl of repudiation ringing in his ears. One thing he knew. The dreams hadn't been like this back when he'd been a kid. His mystery woman had been younger then, and he'd been in his human form, and though they'd met in the same misty clearing, she'd smiled at him in delighted surprise before they'd run through the flowers like small cubs playing a game. It had been a thing of sunshine and joy, not a horror of scarlet blood and a man made helpless to save his mate. Giving up on the push-ups when they did nothing to halt his thoughts of her, he sat back on the carpet he'd installed himself, despite the ribbing from his clanmates about getting soft. Hadn't the big furry mudoks all been jealous afterward and sidled up to him one after the other, asking about where to get the same plush carpet? "Why are you haunting me?" he demanded of the girl-become woman he'd never met, never seen. He was starting to wonder if she was someone his great-grandfather had known. Do Wei-Nguyen had been a powerful F-Psi, the real deal. Yakov and Pavel, in contrast, had only inherited a drop of his talent. With them, it was more a sense of intense intuition rather than a manageable ability.